The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Murphy's diner, casting long shadows across the worn red booths. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, where coffee was always hot and the pie was homemade. Sarah Mitchell sat alone in her wheelchair, her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, a blue scarf wrapped around her neck against the winter chill. At 23, she had learned to navigate a world that wasn't always kind. The pancakes in front of her sat untouched, though a small dollop of whipped cream was melting slowly on top. She didn't notice the group of young men enter. They were loud, cocky, probably in their early 20s, the kind who thought the world owed them something. Their leader, a tall kid with dark hair, noticed Sarah immediately. His eyes narrowed with that cruel spark that comes from insecurity dressed up as confidence. "Hey guys, look at this," he said, loud enough for half the diner to hear. Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew that tone. She had heard it before in parking lots, in grocery stores, anywhere people forgot that wheelchairs held human beings with feelings. The young man walked over, his friends trailing behind like a pack. He leaned down, his hand reaching out. Before Sarah could react, he slapped the side of her head, not hard enough to really hurt, but hard enough to humiliate. "Oops, sorry," he said with a smirk. "Didn't see you there." His friends laughed, that awful performative laughter that echoes in your chest long after it stops. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people. She stared down at her pancakes, willing herself to disappear. One of the other young men, emboldened now, reached over and covered her mouth with his hand. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" The diner had gone quiet. A few patrons looked uncomfortable, but no one moved. No one said anything. It was the silence that hurt most. The waitress behind the counter froze, unsure what to do. Then, just as quickly as they had arrived, the young men left, walking out into the cold afternoon, their laughter trailing behind them like poison. Sarah sat there, trembling. The tears came now, silent and hot. She wanted to leave, but her hands shook too much to even grip her wheels properly. An older waitress, Betty, who had worked at Murphy's for 30 years, came over with a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Honey, I'm so sorry. Those boys, they got no raising. Can I get you anything?" Sarah shook her head, unable to speak. An hour passed. Sarah stayed, not because she wanted to, but because leaving felt like admitting defeat. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations resumed, forks clinked against plates. Then the door opened again. The rumble of motorcycles outside had announced their arrival before they even walked in. 5 men in leather vests, patches marking them as members of the Iron Brotherhood MC. They were big men, broad-shouldered, with weathered faces that told stories of long roads and hard living. The oldest, a man named Frank with a gray beard and kind eyes, was in his late 50s. Behind him walked Marcus, bald and muscular, with tattoos covering both arms. Then came 3 others, all carrying that same presence of men who had seen the world and weren't easily impressed. They took a booth near the back, their leather creaking as they settled in. Betty came over with menus, smiling. She knew these men. They came through town every few months, always polite, always tipped well. "Usual, Frank?" she asked. "You know it, Betty. Coffee all around." As Betty poured their coffee, she hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Frank, something happened earlier. That young lady over there, in the wheelchair. Some punk kids came in and, well, they hurt her, slapped her around, humiliated her. Nobody did anything." Frank's jaw tightened. He looked over at Sarah, who was still sitting alone, staring at cold pancakes. Marcus leaned forward. "Where are these kids now? They left about an hour ago, probably long gone." Frank stood up slowly. "Maybe not." He walked over to Sarah's table, his heavy boots quiet against the tile floor. When he reached her, he knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. His face was serious, but his eyes were gentle. "Miss, my name is Frank. I heard what happened to you. I'm real sorry about that. Nobody deserves to be treated that way." Sarah looked up, surprised. Her eyes were red from crying. "It's okay, it happens sometimes." "No," Frank said firmly, "it's not okay, and it shouldn't happen at all." Marcus and the others had gathered around now, forming a protective circle. "Do you know who those boys were?" Frank asked. Sarah shook her head. "Just some kids. I've never seen them before." Frank stood up, looking at his brothers. Something unspoken passed between them. They had daughters, sisters, mothers. They knew what respect looked like, and they knew what it looked like when it was absent. "Betty," Frank called over. "Those boys, they locals?" Betty thought for a moment. "I think one of them might be Tommy Reeves's kid. Lives over on Maple Street. Drives a blue Honda." Frank nodded. "Come on, boys." They walked out, leaving their coffee steaming on the table. 20 minutes later, the blue Honda pulled back into the diner parking lot. But this time, it wasn't just the car. Behind it, 5 motorcycles formed an escort. The young men inside looked pale. Frank had found them at a gas station down the road. The conversation had been short and direct. "You're going back to that diner, and you're going to apologize. And you're going to mean it." The leader had tried to laugh it off, but one look at Marcus, who stood 6'4" and had arms like tree trunks, changed his mind real quick. Now, back at Murphy's, the young men filed in. The diner went silent again, but this time it was different. This time, every eye was on the boys as they walked over to Sarah's table. The leader, the one who had slapped her, couldn't meet her eyes. His voice was quiet. "Miss, I'm real sorry for what I did. It was wrong. It was cruel. I have no excuse." The others mumbled their apologies too, genuine fear and shame mixing in their voices. Sarah looked at them, then at Frank, who stood nearby with his arms crossed. She took a breath. "I accept your apology, but I hope you remember this feeling. Remember what it's like to be ashamed. And maybe next time you see someone different from you, you'll remember that they're a person too." The young men nodded and left quickly, their heads down. Frank came back to Sarah's table and sat down across from her. "You okay?" She nodded, and for the first time that day she smiled. A real smile. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, we did," Marcus said, sitting down next to Frank. "That's what we do. We look out for people." Betty came over with fresh pancakes, hot coffee, and slices of apple pie for everyone. "On the house," she said. They sat there together for the next hour. Frank told stories about the road, about the places they had seen. Marcus talked about his daughter, who was studying to be a nurse. The other bikers chimed in with jokes and warmth. And Sarah, who had come into that diner feeling alone and small, left feeling seen and protected. As they said their goodbyes in the parking lot, Frank handed Sarah a card with a phone number. "You ever need anything, you call. We're not always in town, but we look after our own." Sarah held the card tight. "I'm not one of your own." Frank smiled, that weathered, knowing smile of someone who had lived long enough to understand what mattered. "Yes, you are. Everyone who needs looking after is one of our own." The motorcycles roared to life, and the Iron Brotherhood rode off into the fading afternoon light. Sarah watched them go, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Because sometimes, when the world shows you its ugliest face, strangers step in to remind you that kindness still exists. That courage isn't just about being tough. It's about standing up when others stay silent. And that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most.